Good evening, I'm Amirul Aiman and this is AWANI International. Tonight, a power play on the world stage as China's President Xi Jinping takes the spotlight in South Korea, promising to defend global free trade at the APEC summit. And a surprise move from Washington as the United States cancels the planned summit between President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Budapest. All that and more right here on AWANI International. Chinese leader Xi Jinping told Asia-Pacific leaders that China would help defend global free trade, taking center stage at the annual APEC summit in Gyeongju, South Korea. The meeting was largely overshadowed by US President Donald Trump, who skipped the forum, leaving a day earlier after holding a separate meeting with Xi aimed at easing their escalating trade war.
Trump's decision to skip APEC reflects his well-known dislike for large multi-nation forums. But his absence risks damaging America's reputation at a summit representing more than half of global trade. At APEC's opening session, Xi defended multilateralism, telling leaders that in turbulent times, nations must cooperate more than ever. He stressed the importance of keeping supply chains stable, responding to U.S. moves to decouple from China, and called for more cooperation in green industries and clean energy, even as some warned Chinese exports in sectors like solar panels and electric vehicles can flood global markets.
The United States has cancelled the planned summit between President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Budapest. The Financial Times report that the decision comes after Moscow maintains a hardline stance on its demands regarding Ukraine. Just days after both leaders agreed to meet, Russia's foreign ministry sent a memo to Washington repeating conditions it says address the root causes of the conflict. These conditions included territorial concessions, major cuts to Ukraine's armed force, and a guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said his country remained open to peace talks, but will not withdraw troops from any additional territory as a precondition. Stay with us, more updates coming your way right after the break.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
Welcome back. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te has rejected Beijing's call for one country, two systems, saying the island will never sacrifice its freedom or sovereignty. Speaking at a military base in Hukou on Friday, Lai said that accepting China's terms would mean abandoning Taiwan's independence and would not bring peace. Lai, whom Beijing labels a separatist, says Taiwan and China are not subordinate to one another. He maintains that only the Taiwanese people can decide their future. His comments follow a warning from China that it will not rule out the use of force to take Taiwan. That marks a sharper tone from Beijing compared with recent state media articles offering a Hong Kong and Macau-style autonomy if the island accepts Chinese rule. Lai has pledged to boost defense spending to 5% of GDP by 2030, a move aimed at countering Beijing's military pressure. The remarks came as Taiwan commissions its first battalion of United States-made M1A2T Abrams tanks aimed at strengthening ground forces against any invasion threat. Washington has delivered 80 of the 108 tanks on order, a sign of continued backing from Taiwan's most important security partner, despite a lack of formal diplomatic ties. China has approved the transfer agreement for TikTok, says U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He told Fox News the deal is expected to move forward in the coming weeks and months, though he gave no further details. Bessent confirmed the approval came during earlier talks with his Chinese counterparts in Kuala Lumpur. China's Commerce Ministry meanwhile confirmed on Thursday that it will work with the US side to properly address issues related to TikTok following President Donald Trump's meeting with President Xi Jinping in South Korea on Thursday. TikTok, used by 170 million Americans, has faced more than 18 months of uncertainty. In 2024, Congress passed a law requiring the app's Chinese owners to sell their US assets by January 2025. In September, Trump signed an executive order approving the sale of TikTok's US operations to a consortium of American and international investors, while delaying enforcement of the law until January 2026. Under Trump's order, TikTok's algorithm will be retrained and monitored by US security partners. The agreement also sets up a 7-member board for the US operations, 6 Americans, and 1 representative from ByteDance, while ByteDance will hold less than 20% of the US company. More on the US, the Senate has moved to block President Donald Trump's global tariffs affecting more than 100 countries. On Thursday, senators voted 51-47 to end the so-called reciprocal tariffs, with 4 Republicans joining all Democrats in the opposition.
This marks the 3rd time this week that Republican senators have sided with Democrats to roll back Trump's tariffs. Earlier in the week, the Senate also approved 2 other resolutions to terminate Trump's tariffs on Brazil and Canada. The vote comes as Trump wraps up a week in Asia, where he reached a deal with China to lower tariffs on Chinese goods and increase purchases of US soybeans and agricultural products. But analysts say the resolutions are largely symbolic and unlikely to be taken up by the House, where Republican leaders have moved to block lawmakers from forcing a tariff vote. Even if the House approves them, Congress would still need a 2/3 majority to override a presidential veto.
Pakistan and Afghanistan agreed to extend their ceasefire following talks held in Istanbul on Thursday, mediated by Turkey and Qatar. The ceasefire, which first took effect on 19 October, follows some of the most intense border clashes between the two nations in years.
Turkey's foreign ministry announced that all parties had agreed to set up a monitoring mechanism to preserve peace and impose penalties for any violations. A follow-up meeting is scheduled to take place in Istanbul on the 6th of November to decide how the mechanism will be implemented. Both Turkey and Qatar reaffirmed their commitment to working with Pakistan and Afghanistan on regional stability. The recent clashes began after Pakistan launched airstrikes inside Afghan territory, targeting Pakistani Taliban militants accused of attacking its forces. The two countries share a 2,600-kilometer border, a long-standing flashpoint marked by recurring skirmishes and mutual accusations of sheltering militants.
The Israeli military carries out airstrikes on the Gaza Strip for a 3rd consecutive night on Thursday, killing 2 people, according to the Palestinian Authority's official news agency. The renewed attacks place further strain on an already fragile ceasefire agreement. Wafa reported that 1 Palestinian was killed by Israeli shelling, while another was shot dead by Israeli forces. A 3rd person later died from wounds sustained in earlier strikes. On the same day, Hamas handed over the bodies of 2 more Israeli hostages. The remains were transferred to the Red Cross before being brought into Israel for identification. Hamas has now returned the bodies of 17 hostages since the ceasefire began on October 10th. Israel has demanded that all 11 remaining Israeli and foreign hostages killed in captivity be returned immediately, as agreed under the US brokered ceasefire deal. The Israeli government has previously accused Hamas of violating that agreement, including handing over the body of someone who was not an Israeli hostage and killing an Israeli soldier during an attack. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered a wave of strikes across Gaza in response. Dato' Sri Anwar Ibrahim is urging APEC to include more Latin American and African economies, calling for a fairer global economic order. Speaking at the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting, the Prime Minister says deeper engagement with the Global South would strengthen APEC and ensure its agenda reflects a multipolar world.
The global transformations before us require whole of society approach to bring about real and value-added change. The future will belong to regions that can foster collaboration among governments, industries, academia, and communities. Collaborative governance is not about sharing power, it is about sharing purpose. Greater anticipation from Latin America and African economies, either through formal or informal engagements, will translate the APEC agenda into something more substantially transformative, inclusive, and truly impactful. This could also set the trajectory towards a more equitable economic architecture that narrows the gaps between the global north and the global south.
Anwar emphasized that global cooperation depends on working across regions and sectors, saying Malaysia supports making APEC more inclusive of diverse economies. He also welcomed the meeting between US President Trump and China's Xi Jinping, describing it as a positive step for regional dialogue. Malaysia is stepping up efforts to develop its own sovereign artificial intelligence capabilities while strengthening global partnerships, Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim said, following talks with NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang and YTL Power International Managing Director Yeo Seok Hong at the APEC Leaders Economic Summit. The meeting focused on reviewing Malaysia's progress in developing sovereign AI infrastructure. Malaysia aims to become a leading AI nation by 2030. Key projects include a national AI office, a sovereign AI cloud, and the country's first large language model, Ilmu, to boost public services, productivity, and digital resilience. YTL Power has completed a high-capacity AI data center in Johor, built on NVIDIA's Blackwell architecture and powered by a 500-megawatt solar facility, reinforcing Malaysia as a regional hub for AI and data. Investment Minister Tengku Datuk Seri Zafrul Aziz confirmed 5.9 billion ringgit in the 2026 budget to accelerate AI development. This week on Wu Says, we look closer at the outcome from the 47th ASEAN Summit. In this first part, Professor Emeritus Dato' Wu Wing Tai and Melissa Idris unpack what inclusivity really means for ASEAN in 2025, as well delve deeper into the agreement between Malaysia and the US and what it means for the country. Here's a segment from a conversation with Professor Emeritus Dato' Dr. Wu Wing Tai.
The trade treaty talks about it applies to goods of Malaysian origin. What do you mean by goods of Malaysian origin? It clearly cannot be goods that is imported from China and immediately reshipped from Malaysia. It is in no sense, credible sense, that it is a Malaysian product. So then the question is, what if the product came here and was semi-finished, and we put our artistic touches to it and put in some advanced technological components in it, and then we ship it off to China? Well, the question is, what is the percent of value added that is Malaysian in origin and Chinese in origin? So the whole thing of local content has been, what's the percentage of foreign inputs in your exports?
Right.
That number has not been specified, because let's face it, if we export coffee makers to the United States, there will have to be a chip inside the, not a high-level chip, but there will be a computer chip inside the coffee maker, and the cheapest producer of that kind of chip is China. So clearly, to maximize profits, we should source from the lowest producers. Now, the question is, what will the Chinese chip comprise of the value of the product? If it is 10%, then that is a very high, 10% means a very high bar for us. That means that 90% has been Malaysian. And that has yet to be specified.
Catch the full conversation on AWANI International and across our social media platforms. That concludes AWANI International for tonight. Stay with us as we track the strategies and power shifts shaping the new global order. For more updates, visit international.astroawani.com and follow us on social media. I'm Amirul Aiman. Thank you for watching. Good night.